You know when you want something but you can't have it and it just makes you crave it all the more? And let's say for whatever reason, you couldn't go to your local cafe right now and you didn't have an espresso machine at home, well, you might really want a little flat white or a cappuccino or a latte. I'm here to help you. Today, we're going to talk about how you can get some really delicious drinks without having to have an espresso machine. I'm going to explore how we can take coffee equipment we might already have and a few other bits and pieces and get to something surprisingly good. Now, that isn't to say espresso machines aren't necessary or useful. The magic of espresso is that it can extract all of the good tasting soluble stuff from the ground coffee using very little liquid. You can end up with a very strong cup of coffee that tastes fantastic, has great texture, got some lovely crema on top. That's the magic of espresso. No other brew method can do a good job of getting the flavour out of the grounds with as little liquid. Let's just say we've got a good burr grinder, but one that can't do espresso, one that doesn't go fine enough to pull traditional espresso shots, like this little cheap Wilfer grinder here. But we can still use a grinder like this to get something great. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to try and make coffee that's very strong, but about half as strong as espresso. In order to get all of the good flavors out of the ground coffee that we're going to start with, we're just going to use a little bit more water. And that means we can use a pretty fine grind, but not as fine, but we need to have some sort of percolation. We need a little bit of pressure in there to get the water through the grinds. For that reason, we're going to be looking at the AeroPress and the Mokka Pot. These are things that lots of people have that can brew surprisingly strong coffee that tastes pretty great. Once we've looked at how to get the best out of those, then we're going to talk about foaming milk at home. Today, we're not going to get overly hung up on the definitions of what is a cappuccino, what is a flat white, what is a cafe latte. I just want you to make something that you like. And that requires you have a cup that you like of an appropriate size. Today, we're going to be trying to mimic an espresso in a way. So we're going to start every time with 18 grams of ground coffee. Now in espresso, that would produce maybe 36 to 40 grams of liquid. Here, we're going to be looking more at 65 to 70 grams of liquid, using a little bit more water as a solvent to pull out some more flavor. That means we need some space in the cup for milk on top of that. So something in the 6-7 ounces, 180, 200 mils, that sort of size is a pretty good place to start if you like the taste of coffee. But you can go a bit bigger if you like something a little softer, a little sweeter, a little less intense. Let's talk about how we're going to brew some coffee. First of all, let's talk grind size. For our 18 grams of coffee that we're going to use each time, we're going to be grinding pretty fine. We're going to be towards the limits of a typical cheap burr grinder. We should have a little bit of texture to it. It shouldn't feel floury in any way. It should feel a little bit between, say, caster sugar and salt. It'll have a bit of texture. But on a grinder like the Wilfer, you are down at pretty much the finest setting here. If you're using a grinder that can go to espresso, you're going to want to be a little bit coarser for these techniques than you would be if you were pulling shots. Though that grind setting will be finer than most supermarket pre-ground coffee. So these techniques won't work super well if you're buying pre-ground coffee. You need a grinder to make life delicious. A quick PSA on the kinds of coffee that you could be using for this. Generally speaking, if your roaster separates coffees that they've roasted specifically for espresso and specifically for filter or drip coffee, you definitely want something espresso focused. They're typically roasted a little bit longer, deeper, more developed, to make them easier to extract with less water. If we brewed with a filter coffee, chances are we'd never do a good job extracting it and we'd have a very sour, unpleasant experience, even when we've added our delicious sweet milk down the line. Let's start with the AeroPress. Now I know the AeroPress claims it can make espresso. It can't. It just can't, okay? Espresso is quite a specific thing. This cannot make it. You cannot produce the pressures necessary. You can't produce the concentrations necessary. Now, this is one of the few times where I'd advocate actually for brewing in what's called the inverted method. The conventional way to brew is just to place this on the cup, add your coffee, add your water, do your extraction this way around. What some people like to do, though, is called the invert method, where you take the plunger, this becomes your base, and in here you have a chamber where if you add water and coffee, they can't go anywhere, they can't escape. That's what we're going to do this time. Do make sure it's plunged in a decent amount of the way. The inverted method freaks me out because it's really easy to make a horrible mess and or burn yourself by flipping this thing around and things popping out, so to be very careful. So you can preheat the AeroPress, you can make sure your filter is nice and rinsed and ready to go, get your scales, add your 18 grams of coffee, and hit 0. So we're going to add 90 grams of water now, which will give us about 70 grams out when we press, because some will be absorbed by the coffee. And we're going to need to stir to make sure all of the coffee is getting wet. Now, it will be a bit clumpy because it's reasonably finely ground, so you do want to be a little bit aggressive in your stirring. Lid on, filter on. Now we're going to steep this for 90 seconds, which seems like a really long time in the world of espresso, but this isn't the world of espresso. We're not looking at 30-second brew times here. We need to do a lot of extraction with not much liquid. That's a real challenge here. After 90 seconds, we're going to invert. I would say cup on first, give it a flip, give it a little swirl to make sure we've got no grounds stuck to the side, and then give it just a second to have the grounds settle towards the bottom. We're going to press very gently. If we push too hard, we might effectively create a channel in that coffee bed and cause some under extraction. So we want quite a gentle pressing. There's no need to get crazy with it. You've got time, it's okay. And usually I would say don't push all the way to the bubbling hiss at the end, but here we need every gram of liquid. We want to hear that bubbling hiss. And here we go. We have 65 to 70 grams of very strong coffee. Perfect for diluting with some delicious milk, but we'll get to that in a minute. I really like the Mokka Pot, but I don't always enjoy the way a lot of people like to use it to make coffee. You can end up with something very strong, but very bitter. We're going to be using this in a kind of similar way to the way I recommend using a Mokka Pot in the video you can see up here, with a few small twists. Now, Mokka Pots are designed, broadly speaking, to do a kind of 10-to-1 ratio. If you fill a Mokka Pot to just below its overpressure valve, in this case that would be about 200 mils of water, and this basket holds about 20 grams of coffee. We don't want all of that water to go through all of that coffee. In fact, we're going to dose, again, 18 grams into this basket. So here's the twists. We're going to be using that finer grind setting we talked about, finer than most people use when they use pre-ground coffee from the supermarket. That means that if we pushed all of the water through it, that would definitely over-extract. We do not want to do that. We want to aim for that same kind of 65 to 70 grams of water through. So here's a quick run through, start to finish. Fill it with freshly boiled water to just below the valve. Grind your coffee, don't tamp it, don't mess with it, don't compact it in any way. Put it all together and put it onto medium heat, and no higher than medium. Now you're just going to have to pay attention. You'll see that slow, beautiful stream of coffee start to appear, and it will look delicious. You want to wait until you hear that very first bubble, that very first bubbling. And at that point, run it under the cold tap. Stop it as quickly as you can. At that point, you should have around 70 grams of liquid in a brewer like this, of that kind of size, or an appropriate amount for the size of Mokka Pot that you're using. So far, so simple. But before you go any further, before you get the milk out of the fridge, or your oat milk, or your soy milk, or your hemp milk, any of those things, before you go down that pathway, taste the coffee. Because at this point, you need to know if you've messed up. If it tastes dominantly sour and is a little bit weak and a little bit empty and hollow feeling, you didn't grind fine enough. If it is a brutal mouthful of bitterness, you've gone a bit too fine, and you can go a little bit coarser next time. What you don't want to do is prep a bunch of milk, finish the drink, taste it at that point and be like, oh, this is disgusting. Now I have to waste the milk and the coffee. Give it a taste. That's what you want. You want balance. There's a touch of acidity, but it's not overwhelming. There's some nice sweetness and texture. There's a little tickle of bitterness, but that's going to be balanced really nicely in the next step with our foamed milk. Now, before we get into milk, there's two quick things I want to talk about. Firstly, every video right now has a coffee giveaway. If you've been laid off, if you're out of work, if you're struggling, you can't afford coffee, click the link in the description and I'll give 10 people somewhere, anywhere in the world, a bag of coffee each from me. And I can do that because these videos have a sponsor. And this video is sponsored by Squarespace. If you want or need to build a website right now, I would absolutely recommend Squarespace. Using one of their many beautiful templates, you can take an idea in your head, add your words, your images to that template, and create something that actually is truly a great representation of who you are and what you do online. It might be a portfolio for your artwork or photography. It might be a website for your cafe or restaurant. It might be a small e-commerce business that you want to start out of your home. All of that and more is built right into Squarespace, and what I particularly like is there's nothing to update or patch or install, but don't take my word for it. Sign up at the link below for a free trial and build something, create something. And after 14 days when you're ready to launch, use code James Hoffmann for 10% off your first website or domain. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So milk foaming. I have 3 options for you at 3 different price points. And just so you know, this cost about £25, this cost £50, and this cost £70. All of them are cheaper than any decent espresso machine that might provide you some sort of steam with which you could steam milk. So while they do involve spending some money, they involve spending less money. Let's start with this one, because it might look a little bit familiar. This is made by Bodum, the same people who make French presses, and it looks exactly like a French press. But it costs more money than a French press, which I think is a little bit cheeky because, to be honest, it doesn't do a better job than a French press. So everything you see me do with this here, you can 100% absolutely do with a French press. So here's how it's going to work. You add hot milk up to this line and no more. Now, in terms of milk temperature, I'll cover this very quickly now. Milk breaks at about 70 degrees Celsius. Above that temperature, you permanently, irreversibly change the chemistry and taste of the milk. You begin to cause it to break down and create new and often unpleasant flavors. It gives you that kind of cooked, eggy smell. You can't have a really delicious, really hot milk drink. So generally speaking, I would recommend going no higher than 65 degrees Celsius, though I'm aware with something like this, it's pretty tricky to know how hot 65 degrees Celsius is without a thermometer. So if you have one, that's useful, because you're going to have to heat your milk somewhere else. I trust you to get it right. I believe in you. The principle's very simple. Go like this. And you end up with this sort of reasonably foamy thing that's kind of okay, actually. It's not the worst. I have a stainless steel pitcher here that's used for pouring latte art, and I'm not going to claim that I'm going to be able to pour beautiful latte art because I'm not. This is foamed in a French press. But the texture's okay. Nothing fancy, nothing special. You could pour kind of like a simple monk's head or something like that quite easily. Your rosetta would not go well. How does this taste? Actually, like the foam isn't perfect by any stretch, but it's got a nice moussey texture that would make for a reasonable cappuccino. There's a nice, pleasant, strong coffee taste here, as you'd expect from a drink like that. Not bad. With a French press and a Mokka Pot or an AeroPress, you can get a really surprisingly good cappuccino-like thing that I think you'd really enjoy. And again, at this point, I will reiterate, you can use oat milk, soy milk, any of the other milks you want to alongside dairy if you don't want to do dairy. What I would say is definitely go for the barista style versions of those things. They tend to foam better and have a better texture when hot from a kind of replication of that fatty richness that whole milk has. Let's move on to some fancier things. Now going into this, I thought this next contender was just ridiculous. It's £50 and it doesn't do that much, but I kind of like it. I like it more than I thought I would. The way that these work is interesting. You have essentially a kind of kettle, it's a hot jacket, and inside it there's a little spinny frother mechanism. This one's driven by magnets inside of here, which is kind of cool. It's kind of like those little handheld whisks you used to get, combined with a kettle or all in one. Now the way it works is you put your milk in up to your desired level. I'm going to go reasonably high. Put your lid on, push go. Now this does two things. It both froths the milk, it whips in air with that little whisk and heats it at the same time. And by combining these actions, it's a little bit frustrating. You have no control over how much air goes in, you just get as much as you get. That's the one downside of these. They tend to produce more foam than you expect them to. But the quality of that foam genuinely surprised me. Oh yeah. It is a bit too foamy. So what I would say is perfectly acceptable. Get the nicest spoon you have. I've got a fancy spoon. And just get rid of that foam. You're in a kitchen in the morning. I'm sure you can find a use for milk foam. Don't just throw it down the sink. Make fancy cereal or something. And then we're going to give it a little swirl and decant into our jug and see if we can pour anything with it. Now again, it's a tricky texture to pour latte art with, but you might get something like a little tulip or something like that out of it. Cheers. Yeah, very good. Now I'm not sure how much I'd advocate for you spending 50 quid on this unless you liked foamy milk drinks and you wanted them to be as easy as possible every day. It will heat milk without foaming it. I don't know why. I guess if you didn't want any foam. And it will do cold milk froth too, but it's 50 quid. There are cheaper ones, there are more expensive ones. I was probably very anti these. I am a lot less anti these than I was, but it's still 50 quid. That's a lot of money for a slightly fancy kettle and a whisk. There is one more option I wanted to get and look at and talk about, and this is called the Bellman. All this does is make steam for foaming milk. That's its whole purpose. It's £70 online, and it works in a very simple way. You've got a lid, and inside you put your water. Not too much water, not too little water. Put it back together. Once it's tightened up again, nice and tight, you put it on the heat. And the water inside boils, turns to steam, the steam gets trapped, and then you can just tap it off here to your steam wand with your little steam valve. So far so good. This is the only option really that will let you separate foaming, adding of air, from heating. The way that steam wands work is that when you're steaming with them, at the start of the process you have the wand right on the surface of the milk. When it's there, you'll hear it's there. You get a kind of slurping sound as it whips in the air. You can do as much of that as you want to create as much foam as you want. And then, as quickly as possible really, you want to get the wand under the surface of the milk and have that steam act to sort of move that milk around, roll it around, smash the big bubbles that you made at the start down to being so small that you can't see them. On paper, this is the most capable of all of the ways in terms of producing the best possible texture, producing the best latte art if you want to do that at home. This is definitely it. But it will probably drive you crazy before then. This thing is a little scary, a little frustrating, and a little bit just awkward all in one. First things first, this is a pressured vessel. Pressured vessels are scary things. Fear them in your life, look after them, treat them well. Mokka Pots are pressured vessels as well. This is a much, much bigger version of that. They say put it on medium-high heat for 5 minutes. There's no gauge here. There's no information. You have no idea how hot this thing is. You have no idea how much steam pressure is inside of it. You have no idea when you have enough steam pressure to steam milk. While I was testing this, would regularly just open the valve a little bit to see how much steam was coming out and try and kind of gauge whether that was enough to foam good milk from, having used commercial machines for years and years and years. Often I guessed wrong. There wasn't enough steam. I would start to steam a pitcher of milk and it would go wrong. There just wasn't enough pressure inside of it. I just didn't really enjoy it, but you could probably get some very good results from it with a little bit of work and a little bit of effort. So it works okay. I just wouldn't strongly recommend it. Now, as a final little FAQ, when it comes to coffee brewing, you could use other methods, but I would always recommend something that has percolation and a bit of pressure. Using a French press to make very strong coffee doesn't really work. Using a pour over to make very strong coffee doesn't really work. It tends not to taste very good, and I haven't really found a way around that. More importantly, I'd love to hear from you. What did I miss? What should I have covered? What do you want to see me touch on in the future when it comes to making better milk drinks at home? I'd love to hear from you down in the comments below. But for now, I say thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.